back again in Saas-Fee. I have a slight cold because I had to fight yesterday and today with a temperature difference of something like 20 degrees between Berlin and Saas-Fee. But I hope it's fine. The best way is to jump immediately into our things. And with things I will start. Res extensa and res cogitans. Extended things and thought things have become tightly interwoven. We all know that. Our existence has become basically technical. Experimental poet and philosopher Max Spencer wrote in 1948, our existence has become basically technical. Heidegger was a little late with his Technik und die Kehre from 1962. Interestingly enough, I might talk tomorrow about him quickly again. Max Spencer, he wrote his philosophical dissertation in 1936 on Daseinsrelativität und Quantenphysik, the relativity of being and quantum physics, in 1936. What we call our world is not thinkable anymore without mediation. Mathematicians and physicians, historians and philologists of all kinds, theologians, philosophers, and even art critics, at least some of them, they all know that they are dealing with media, or at least with media-conditioned material, when they investigate the archives, the knowledge containers and generators which are produced in their fields of thought operation, when they try to understand and to mediate them to others. They all have to learn to read, to interpret, to calculate media materialities and structures, like the metaphysical messages articulated and transported by the signifying bodies and networks. Since I decided to study philology, poetry, art, linguistics, and philosophy in the framework of a technical university, many years ago, of course, I knew that we need a kind of expanded hermeneutics. Text and language are not the only signifying praxis. We have to understand, or we have to try to understand. An expanded hermeneutics has to include machines, ensemble of machines, man-machine relations, programs, images, sound. But experimental hermeneutics is not only quite a new subject field, it needs also, I'm deeply convinced of that, new variations of research, of teaching, and presentation of knowledge. This was the point some years ago when I started to develop new faculties. Faculties in the true sense of the term. Faculties not primarily in the institutional sense, but in the sense of capabilities, of qualifications we need for the presence to come. I don't go very deep into that because one of your colleagues, one of the EGS scholars, has done a nice book. I think it was last year, Chris, wasn't it? It's called What is Education? And it contains a few essays, including my presentation of these new faculties. Faculties for dignity, for hospitality, for unusual actions, for paleofuturism. Regarding my deep time research, I come back to that extensively during the seminar. Pataphysics, cultura experimentalis, aesthetics of resistance, chaos pilots, kairos poets, non-censorable systems, knowledge of the winds, navigations, critical engineering, projections, scale, archaeology, and so on. To propagate such kind of faculties is one thing. To do them and to support them is another. Most of the academic institutions are much too heavy, too lazy, and too tired to support such ideas. I'm very happy because I found a wonderful partner with whom it has become possible to integrate artistic, aesthetical, and analytical and historic research. This partner is the Center for Art and Media, the ZKM, in Karlsruhe, and especially its director, Peter Weibel. Together, we developed parcours for thinking. Conceptual, sometimes even philosophical exhibitions. These are the most outstanding examples of the last 4-5 years. Without Firm Ground, Wilhelm Flosser and the Arts from 2015, which later went to Den Haag, to Prague, to Sao Paulo and to other places. Alas Automata on the Arabic Islamic Renaissance, 800 to 1200, an exhibition which we developed between 2015 and 2016. Dia Logos, Ramon Lull, and the Ars Combinatoria. This is still very fresh. I will talk about that tonight, completely unprotected, so to speak, and an exhibition we just opened, Art in Motion, 100 masterpieces with and through media, an operative canon. The project started just 3 weeks ago, and it will definitely at least go till 2020. You can see already, looking at the titles of the exhibition, that the themes, the concepts behind them are quite complex. And of course, by thinking, developing, and finally realizing such kind of projects, we were, of course, not inventing everything new, but we were standing on the shoulders of giants. Just to give you a few examples, because nowadays everything looks as it was just invented. One of the very early exhibitions on the subjects we are interested in was organized by artist Richard Hamilton, Man, Machine and Motion, at the Institute for Contemporary Arts in London in 1955. A bit more than 10 years later, followed by cybernetic Serendipity, a wonderful exhibition curated by Jessia Reichert, The Computer and the Arts, 1968. It opened a few months before The Machine, as seen at the end of the Mechanical Age, opened in New York at the Museum of Modern Art, curated by Pontus Hulten. This is perhaps one of the most prominent and well-known examples, not only because of the catalog. The catalog is, has a cover of heavy metal. It's also quite difficult to get nowadays and quite expensive. The, let's say, first 3/4 of the catalog and the exhibition was dedicated to traditional arts and objects with mechanical gestures, and then the last section was focusing on art and its interrelationship with computers. And of course, very important, the shortly after that following exhibition, Software, Information Technology, its new meaning for art, 1970. This is 48 years ago at the Jewish Museum, and it was a cooperation with Smithsonian. A little bit later, when things became more and more popular regarding the media discourse, in France, in Paris, two very well-known exhibitions took place, at least the second one you know all. The first one, Electra, l'électricité et l'électronique dans l'art in the 20th siècle, in the 20th century. It was curated by Frank Popper. About Frank Popper we can talk perhaps at another occasion. More well known to you is Jean-François Lyotard and his exhibition on les immatériaux, which started 1985. It was planned, of course, for the Orwell year 1984, and it was opened in 1985. These are all very much conceptual exhibitions trying to discuss the things which arrived in the cultural, in the political, in the economical system decades ago, and most of them are completely forgotten already. I would like to connect the project I would like to present today in a focus with a suggestion to the European Graduate School. I made very good experiences with so-called project professorships. You create a professorship for a specific project, like, for example, the Ramon Lull exhibition we will discuss in a short time. You install a research phase of at least 1 or 2 years. And then, of course, you need a kind of aim, a goal which you want to reach with this project. An exhibition is one possibility, but of course there are other possibilities. At the moment in Karlsruhe we develop such a project together with Bruno Latour. It's following strongly his earlier exhibitions on iconoclasm and reset modernity. and it's focusing on his new research facing Gaia, the critical zone, his attempt not to go out to space to find an alternative for those who are inhabiting the planet, but to go onto the Earth, through the Earth, so to speak, to make this odyssey, which is so necessary to somehow save the planet. The critical zone will take place as an exhibition in 2020, and in between we are meeting at various places. Hopefully it will work out in September in Tehran, and discuss the project and its possibilities, but mainly Bruno Latour is giving seminars 3 times a year in Karlsruhe, and students from all over the world are coming to work with him to develop this exhibition. An intensive interrelation between research, reflection, and the idea to integrate artistic forms and principles and methods of research into the development of such a project. I know that you have been in Venice at the beginning of the classes in the summer, and I think also in June. Perhaps you have seen near the Giardini this sculpture, which was built up in May, I think, this year. It was built by Daniel Liebeskind and his studio. This is how what I call the economy of friendship works. The economy of friendship, which is all the basic economy of the EGS. I'm deeply convinced of that. One of the participants in the seminar with Bruno Latour is Daniel Liebeskind's daughter, Rachel Liebeskind. She told her father about the project. Her father got the book, Facing Gaia, read it, was completely taken by the book, and built this sculpture for Venice as a spontaneous action. Daniel has enough money to make such kind of spontaneous actions, of course.
Maybe joining us in October.
Wonderful. She's a great young artist and a wonderful scholar, and it would be great to have her here at the EGS. Prospective archaeology. I'm coming to my theme tonight. And chrono-topological interventions. These are the 2 tactics I would like to focus on within the framework which I just sketched out. These are only 2 of the tactics rumoring inside of these projects, these research and exhibition projects, but for me they are extremely important and also very exciting. They are not only working logically very well, but they are also rich sources for intellectual and sensual pleasure. I will focus the next, let's say, 30 minutes or so on the project Dialogos, Ramon Lull, and the Ars Combinatoria, or in English, combinatorial arts. And I apologize for that, with reading a very short text as some kind of an intro to the subject of Ramon Lull and his work. I use this short text because, as you have realized already, I'm not speaking English, but Jinglish, and sometimes it's a break for you to listen to translated work. I try to make it as short as possible. In this case, I translated it by myself, which is, of course, another form of working with language than the free speech form. Who is this strange guy, Ramon Lull? Some of you will know him, some of you perhaps not. What is it that we call Lullism, which is an attitude, a way of thinking, which you can find in the last, let's say, 700 years at different parts of the world? In his short text on the Golem of Prague, many of you will know that. In his short text on the Golem of Prague and the Golem of Rehovot, which has become legendary for the archaeology of artificial extelligences, Gershom Scholem uses a story to make the decisive epistemological point in his view about extelligence created by humans. I quote Scholem: "Man can assemble the forces of nature, identified by him as the basic forces of material creation, and combine them into a semblance of the human pattern. But there is one thing he cannot give to his product: speech, which to the biblical mind is identical with reason and intuition." The Talmud tells a little story, and Scholem is quoting it. Rabbah created a man and sent him to Rabbi Zerah. The rabbi spoke to him, but he did not answer. Whereupon the rabbi said, "You must have been made by my colleagues of the academy. Return to your dust." The occasion for Scholem's text of 1965 was the inauguration of a new computer for Chaim Packery's team at the Weizmann Institute in Rehovot in Israel. Scholem suggested the computer should be named Golem number 1, Golem Aleph. Imo negando ponit ipsum esse, est subjectum adequatum huius sapientiae cabalisticae. This was a quote by Ramon Lull. In the introduction to his works, the opera, Lull formulates his epistemic credo and reveals the origins of his thinking. In their inseparable connection with things, being and word are the appropriate objects of a science understood as Kabbalistic. I quote Lull, please listen to these words. The order of all things, Lull continues in the next sentence, is predetermined through the indestructible connection of being and word, which in turn is not subject to any prior constructed order. The order of all things, a verbal quotation. By the very details of its phrasing, such a notion belongs to the operative world of the mind, which Roland Barthes described as structuralist activity. His homo significans can be understood as a historically late variant of Lullism, whose most important actions consist in an ongoing interrelationship between dismantling and reassembling. Lull's epistemological starting point is clear. All three monotheistic religions are religions of the word. They are based on the axiom that at the beginning of existence there was the word. Therefore, existence and word are only conceivable as an inextricable interpenetration. However, this also means that there must be processes both within the systems of each of the religions as well as in their interdependencies, which in contemporary parlance could be referred to as communications. If I could formulate a code that would be comprehensible in all languages, the foundations of the religions of the book, then I would possess an instrument that can be applied to all the monotheistic visions of God. I would be in possession of a theological all-purpose machine. This is a quote which is very familiar to you. I would be in possession of a theological all-purpose machine with the potential of a universal machine. In his contribution to the catalogue of the first major exhibition, which I mentioned, dedicated entirely to the phenomenon of software and its new meaning for the arts, organized by the Jewish Museum in 1970, the hypertext pioneer Theodor H. Nelson recalls this term of John von Neumann's for the digital computer from the 1940s. In von Neumann's opinion, all-purpose machine was the appropriate name for it. Allzweckmaschine in German. All-purpose machine was the appropriate name for it. However, it did not catch on because it's not very sexy and sellable and was not a success in terms of marketing strategy. Basically, at least 3 steps are necessary to invent a universal machine based on language. And all technological variants of communication must pass through these steps. At the same time, they serve as a minimum requirements for algorithmic artifacts. First, the multiplicity of messages to be communicated has to be concentrated and reduced to a manageable number of axiomatically based elementary truths. This is the prerequisite for dismantling thought into discrete and thus into fundamental operational steps. Second, reduction of the semiological complexity of the natural and written languages in which the messages are formulated to a small number of symbolic elements, in Lull's case, selected letters of the alphabet. One could speak, media theoretically, of the separation of the message from the body of the messenger as a precondition for this process. The separation of the message from the body of the messenger, whereby, in our case, bodies would be the words and statements. The defined symbols, letters, function as triggers for the memory and the deductive activities of their user. Third, and this is especially remarkable for a thinker in the late Middle Ages. Third, materialization of the symbolic signs and their combinatory possibilities on hardware that enables the user to play with perpetual repetition to produce differential meanings in a physical medium. This medial objectification as the prerequisite for spatially or temporally ordered objects to be brought into ever new configurations through the art of combination, composed as it were. Letters replace words and sentences, and through their logical connectivity, generate new meaningful sentences, which in turn are able to spawn ideas. The rigorous reduction of actual diversity is a necessary step both for archiving knowledge and also for its reactivation as a space of possibilities of future knowledge. So far this very condensed pre-intro to the work of Ramon Lull. I will come back to that in a very concrete way by making some passages through his work, especially through some of the images which we found in the different sources in the last 700 years. But before I do so, I would just like quickly, in my own words, to sketch out one or two stations, or let's say traces we took to come to this project. In a narrower sense, I was always reading about Lull and some of his work in Latin many decades ago already. But in the first decade of the new millennium, it became somehow urgent again to deal with his ideas, with the idea of creating, in the true sense of the term, communication between the three monotheistic book-based religions. In the Chris mentioned it already, in the conference Variantology 2, which took place in 2005, we discussed Lull extensively. In the book, which came out 1 year later, Peter Blackwood made this slightly naive drawing of the Christian, the Muslim, and the Jew together in close connection, in close communication. This was, as you all know, already reacting to many political circumstances of the time, but of course it was long before the strong war conflicts started. I will not talk about that much longer. Aaron Shekine or Shakine, a Muslim, a Christian, and a Jew. This is a wonderful book. I don't know who knows it. It's a comic book about the same subject. It uses the language of comic strips to discuss the possibilities of dialogue, of an unconditioned dialogue between the three monotheistic religions. This is an image which Monochrome shot in Kantstraße in Berlin. It's the window of quite a famous Japanese restaurant, and the building on the other side of the street is mirroring in the window, and you might be able to read the text underneath, which comes of course from the book from Iran. A Muslim, a Christian, and a Jew don't realize happiness was following them for some time already, or for some time now. A beautiful object, thinking thing you can find on the street, and which helps you to get your ideas better formulated. There are many of these little things, but of course at the beginning when you start such a project, you are trying to make some kind of systematic schemes to get an idea of how the project could be constructed. Alejo, this is an overhead transparency, of course, but because the machines have become not very much reliable anymore, I'm using the computer meanwhile, as you can see, for presenting the work, but this was from the time when I still used the overhead projector. You can see I simply wrote the life dates of Ramon Lull in the center of the sheet of paper or transparency, and then I started to associate which fields I would be interested in by going deeper into the world of Lullism and of Ramon Lull. As combinatoria, the combinatorial arts, closely connected with issues like permutative composition and permutative poetry, interface theory, informatics, different program languages, lyrics, poetry, and of course calculating machines, automatic poetry, Kabbalah, already mentioned, cryptology, secret languages, intelligent machines, extelligent machines, media theory, troubadourism, a very important point. I will not have time to talk about that later. This is why I stop here for 3 or 4 minutes. Before Ramon Lull became enlightened, so to speak, before he dedicated his life completely to Jesus and to God, he was a troubadour. He was a singer, and he wrote love songs. He came from a quite wealthy family, and he could afford that. He was not really working, and he had a lot of girlfriends and women whom he admired, so he wrote love songs for them. And this is extremely important. This is something which is not really discovered yet in the huge amount of works which had been written by Ramon Lull. He, by the way, wrote, Chris, take your time seriously, 280 books in his lifetime. He got something like 81 years old. 280. And some of them are really large books, foliants. We will see a few in a minute. So before he did all that, he was doing lyrics. And this is extremely interesting to connect this tradition of writing lyrics, writing poetry, formalize language in a specific way of rhythm and so on, in connection with his machines, with his paper machines, which I will introduce in a second. So this was some kind of a rough starting point, but then the project became denser and denser, and then we started with a sub-project which I already mentioned, the Chrono Topological project. I'm very happy that the mother of one of the authors of this part of the project, Robert Preusse, is here tonight. She has a house here in Saas-Fee, and so she's visiting us and listening a little bit to the wonderful work her son has done in the last months. At least I will show some aspects of it. Robert Preusse is, by the way, working at the moment after he studied at the University of Arts in Berlin, in London mainly, with wonderful, interesting people, but I should concentrate on Ramon Lull. The first attempt was to understand this strange chronotopological situation where Ramon lived. The place, the Mallorca, he moved a lot from Mallorca to other places of the world. He was a lot traveling between the mainland Spain and Mallorca, but he used the whole Mediterranean for his journeys, because he also wanted practically to do this communication machine in terms of communicating between the monotheistic religions. The places, to connect them with a time dimension, and this is the specific thing of this chronotopological tactics, the ideas which are connected with the people he met making this kind of journeys, this kind of traveling. As a starting point for this sub-project, we used a very remarkable text. It's called Breviculum ex artibus Raimundi Lulli electum from 1321. This is perhaps the most famous manuscript on Lull. The author is Thomas Le Misier. He was a scholar of Lull, so we even have the idea behind his drawings that Lull looked a little bit like that. He knew him, and he put him into image. So these are the only, let's say, authorized images we have of Ramon Lull. It's a large foliant, not very thick, and the main content is 12 beautiful paintings, drawings like that, integrating a lot of speech, of language, of texts, and describing Lull's basic movements and basic ideas. It was a gift for us to be able to work with that and to create our own cartography, integrating places, ideas, and different layers of time. It's described here on the left side. Perhaps while I'm talking you can try to read that a little bit, but this is not so important. What we tried to express with that was that movement which we connect with modernity, movement was very decisive for the development of the idea of Ramon Lull. You can see here these different lines. These are movements he did in real, movements from Mallorca to mainland Spain, but also of course to Rome. He traveled more or less through North Africa, the Near East. He was in southern Italy, Naples, and so on. So he was traveling quite a lot, and the movement is a very decisive part of the development of his ideas. This is how the electronic version of this chronotopological map was working or looked like in our exhibition in Karlsruhe. This is something like 6 meters long and more than 4 meters high. Robert Beusser and Stefanie Rau did the design for that. And you can see already the model which is laying underneath this cartography is a so-called Portulan map from 14th century Mallorca. The Portulan map are very specific because they contain the winds and the directions, the possible directions of movements for the people who were traveling on the sea, navigating, reading the winds was very important and will become very important again. I'm absolutely convinced about that. And we use this kind of network as a base to construct the journeys of Ramon Lull. And then, as you can see here in the stills, we made the following. When the graphic was moving from one direction, from one place to the other, we integrated the people, the persons from different times, from different periods of time, who were connected with Lull's idea, who are constituting the idea of Lullism, and image by image, in a it's all, the whole thing runs together. It's something like 25 minutes. You get an enormous amount of information. In the windows you can read, for example, here in this case, Giordano Bruno, one of the great Lullistic thinkers who not only read nearly everything which Lull has written, but who worked a lot with this idea of ars combinatoria by himself. Some of the main thinkers we give special attention, otherwise it would be impossible to integrate all that into this chronotopological graphics. For the catalog for the book, we had to transform these moving images into stills, and now we have a lot of, like in the cinema, successive images which are printed one after the other. Of course, there is only a selection of this kind of movements which Lull did, but some of the most important connections we have installed. Francis Yates, for example, but very important, Abraham Ben Meyer ibn Ezra, a Jewish scholar whom Lull read a lot and learned a lot about his approach to Kabbalah. On the other side, you have Agrippa from Nettesheim, who is also very important for cryptology. Ramon Zibuida from the 14th to the 15th century, a very interesting Spanish scholar, also working very strongly with ars combinatoria. So step by step, you get through the last 700 years layers of connections between the main protagonist, Ramon Lull, and activities in various parts of the world connected with his ideas. This kind of chronotopological method and tactics are used meanwhile in different constellations. I definitely will come back to 2 or 3 more, perhaps tonight, but definitely through the seminar. But to come back to the core work of Ramon Lull, the Ars Magna or the Ars Brevis, the shorter version of his great work on ars combinatoria. This is from a book from the 15th century, Nicolas of Cuza, Raimundus Lullus opera. Nicolas of Cuza was the greatest collector in the 15th century of Ramon Lull's work. In the library, which is still existing, there are some 80 books, and some of them, as you can see here, extremely beautiful. Now I can see here the paperwork. I hope the image is sharp for you too. You should even be able to see the 3-dimensional objects, the 3 discs as different layers of information, which you can rotate, turn around, and then combine the different letters to senseful thoughts. These are all different kind of figures Lull was describing and playing with. Our ambition was to bring all the languages which Lull addressed with his great work into the exhibition and hopefully under the roof of a glass vitrine. This was extremely difficult. There is a Jewish version, a Hebrew version of the Ars Magna, which is in New York, and there is an Arab version of his great work. It's from 1682, and it was very difficult to get hold of that. Finally, we found out, when I made my research on Alas Automata, I had no problem with communicating with Aleppo. This was around 2012, 2013, but I tried it again to find out if they have this manuscript, and it was practically impossible around 2015, 2016, but we were finally very happy that we at least got a digital copy of the manuscript for the exhibition. I think I have this image here. This wonderful librarian sent us suddenly, after months, we didn't hear anything from him, a long letter with some photographs in it. That's him with some of the books which he saved during the war. There are some images which I do not want to show you. The library is destroyed completely. It only makes you very sad. And he told us the very happy news that the digital copy is still safe. The original copy is still safe, it's existing. And then we tried hard to get him over to Karlsruhe. It was not possible, it was too complicated. Finally, they sent him back again. They did not want to get this book outside. The Syrian government did not allow that. He had to go back to Aleppo, which was difficult enough. But as I said, we were able to show this copy. The Hebrew version was a little bit easier because it's in the library of the Jewish Theological Seminar in New York. One of these wonderful librarians came over to Karlsruhe and brought the book, and we were able to show it for 4 months. So the three languages, the Latin, the Hebrew, and the Arab language, Ars Magna, were lying under one glass roof together, back to back, side by side, communicating with each other. In art, things like that are possible. In other parts of reality, it's much more difficult. This is another version of the Latin variant of the Ars Magna. This one is very nice and clear because it contains the main figures with which Ramon Lull worked. And you also have here an idea of this, let's say, quasi-algorithmical way he was thinking his Ars Magna with the different combinations of the letters which he wrote in this kind of tabula. You could use the machines to develop your own ideas about the great work. I brought 2 of the brochures. You can look at them while I'm speaking, which we made for the exhibition in a very, very large, in a huge amount of copies. Robert Preusser and Stefanie Rau did also this part here. The people, the visitors of the exhibition can build their own thinking machines and try to play with it. This is why, and we did not sell them, we gave them for free, so they are practically all gone, and the exhibition is over now. We are going to Lausanne in November and will start to show the work there, but in a much smaller way. Rotating discs containing basic information which you can combine into some kind of generative thoughts. This is a principle which has been picked up by a lot of scholars in media history. As you know from my deep time book, The Archaeology of Media, Giovanni Battista della Porta, a great Neapolitanian thinker and media scholar, was one of them. In his great book on secret letters from the first version was 1563. This is from the 1601 version. It contains a cryptological device which works basically like the Ars Magna by Ramon Lull. Here you have the hand of God, which is also possible to play with it. You can circle it around. It's pointing at signs which Della Porta has written, of course, in a tabula, and you can find the terms, the words for them, and you can combine them with letters to senseful messages. This was a method which was used a lot. Here you see the book by Giovanni Battista della Porta with this appendix. You can cut that out and then you can play with your own cryptological machine. I just show you the inside of that book as a bridge to the next scholar of Lulism, whom I admire very much, of course, which is Leibniz. What you see here in this book on secret language and secret letters by Della Porta is a binary code. The code has two discrete information, so to speak, signs, line and dot. With the help of the lines and the dots, you are able to identify letters, which you see written down here in this sketch on the left side of the book. The alphabet is, of course, reduced here in this case, so it's easier handleable, and you have basically a binary code to construct secret messages and secret languages. We know in the history of philosophy and the history of sciences that the development of the binary code is, at least in Europe and in the German-speaking part, very strongly connected with Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. His great Dissertatio de Arte Combinatoria. Even in the title it has the Lull work inside of it. He dealt extensively with Ramon Lull. He criticized him a lot for his arbitrariness and so on. Leibniz was, of course, much more scientific, and he wanted to go much more straight into universal communicable language. The right sketch is extremely interesting. We also show it, of course, in the exhibition, which shows the transcultural universality of the binary system. The diagram of the I Ching hexagrams owned by Leibniz. He got them from a Jesuit from Beijing, Joachim Bouvet, with red numbers. You can see that a little bit, it's brownish now. The red Arabic numerals, which Leibniz added to this diagram of the I Ching to explain that this would be a wonderful idea to express numbers, different numbers, and you know that he did it, and you know that he also developed a machine for calculating. And this is, of course, also part of the exhibition. The machine as a masterpiece is very strongly carrying the whole dualistic universe. I mentioned it at the beginning, a very strong connotation could be and is the connection with music and musical composition, but even for me it was quite new that Arnold Schoenberg was working with quite a similar device to construct his 12-tone music. On the right hand you can see a piece of hard paper containing 3 rings with different kind of information, which Schoenberg, of course, could read very well. And he used it to make arbitrary connections between different sound patterns and to play with them and to try them out, to experiment with them, which is not so much different from the thinking machine which Ramon Lull used for theological subjects. The left side is dedicated or is belonging to the 3rd string quartet, opus number 30. You see the precondition for working with such kind of rotating discs, the cardboard paper string, which works like, what is it in English, Rechenschieber. You can move this this thing, and you get different connections with the different informations in the tabula. This is only one of the extraordinary pieces connected with music. Of course, John Cage plays an important role in our universe of Lulism, but I will not talk about him today. Very important, as I mentioned already regarding Leibniz, is the tradition of calculating machines. We were focusing on a family, on a phylum of machines, of calculating machines, which work either aesthetically or in their construction similar as the paper machines of Ramon Lull. This is a very beautiful machine from Philipp Matthäus Hahn from the 18th century, 1770, with rotating drum. There are only 3 of them existing. The machine is absolutely wonderful, and no, hardly any private person don't even try to buy it, can afford it. When we prepared the exhibition, again, Daniel Liebeskind came into the game, and I had a conversation with him, and I told him about Ramon Lull. I did not know that I knew that Daniel has read a lot, but I did not know that he ever had one of his books in his hands. And Daniel was completely excited and said, "I built a house after Lull's principle." It was never built in reality, but I was making a model for it, the virtual house. And this is what you can see here. The text you can read is by Daniel himself, so read it. It's much better than my bad English. The cylindric mechanism of the virtual house, inspired by Ramon Lull's wheels, consists of 365 ring segments rotating around their common axis in the poetics of choice. Each day is a real beginning of the virtual, and so on and so on. Later he built in Mallorca a gallery which took up or picked up this idea and brought it indeed into the reality of existing architecture. A lot of contemporary artists have been somehow influenced and even initiated by the work of Ramon Lull. One of them is Ralph Becker. The piece is one of our most favorite pieces within the exhibition regarding contemporary arts. It's called Rechnender Raum, calculating space. This is a term for those of you who are familiar with history of algorithmic machines. This is a term by Konrad Zuse. He imagined the calculating process in a space-like form, and Ralph Becker was making his diploma work at the Academy of Arts. He was one of my students in 2007, which is extremely beautiful. Every element, apart from this solid sticks, of course, is moving inside of this space, and the whole installation is playing with feedback sound and is permanently moving and building new kinds of combinations of the various elements you can see here. This is of course a very long shot, and you can't see the details. The other pole, so to speak, of artists who are strongly engaged with Lullism and the idea of Ramon Lull is, for example, Anselm Kiefer. Finally, we had been very happy to get this huge painting. It was nearly 6 meters long to Karlsruhe, which made the exhibition nearly explode, because the whole logistics and everything and insurances and so on was so complicated and so expensive. But finally we did it. Jacob's Ladder as the as a very strong reference in Ramon Lull's work too. The essence from not knowing to knowing, from the earth to heaven, and from the animalistic and the human to God, used in Ramon Lull's work a lot, and in Kiefer's work a very prominent subject. The purpose of my lecture tonight is not to give you an intensive insight of Ramon Lull's work. What I wanted for tonight is to make you familiar with attempts and with experiments in bringing ideas into space, into the exhibition space, into exhibition formats. We very soon, the book is finished now, it's in production. We very soon will finish, will publish with Minnesota University of Minnesota Press the book with a lot of very interesting texts, and then next year perhaps we can talk even deeper about Lullism. The theme for tonight was prospective archaeology, the reconstruction part of the Lullistic work is extremely important to us. We are reconstructing the whole Ars Magna as a modern software with which you can play, so that you can, we will have that in Lausanne in a few weeks, and you can play with a simple Mac with the Ars Magna and the ideas around it. Prospective archaeology means, in my concept, you take the objects, and this is part for me of this expanded hermeneutics, you take the objects, although the technical objects, extremely serious. You have a lot of respect to them. You go down on the same level, how they are working, and then you observe how they are working, reconstruct them, and by reconstructing them, understand them, make them understandable. I did this kind of work quite a lot meanwhile with students and with different other people. I will give you, because most of you will not know that, at least one or two examples from this project, Alas Automata, which again also has an extensive chronotopological part, but I will not talk about this one. Alas Automata, one of the prospective archaeology projects was a musical automaton from 850 from Baghdad, constructed by three young kids. They were younger than most of you, beginning of their 20s when they did that. The text, the manual, was quite an adventure to get. Finally, we found it in the Bibliothèque Orientale in Beirut, in the University St. Joseph. And we found it in this state. The library was destroyed in the 19th century by a group of Christian Orthodox people, but a monk took photo negatives of this manuscript, and we were able, with the help of different filters and computer mechanisms, to make the manuscript readable and to read the construction of the machine. But I have to go back, sorry, I have to go back to this other slide, because this is the beginning. This is the beginning of the text, how we got it, and this is the beginning in the English translation. We wish to explain how an instrument is made which plays by itself continuously in whatever melody. We wish sometimes in a slow rhythm and sometimes in a quick rhythm, and also that we may change from melody to melody when we so desire. We are in 850. This is a universal musical machine. a machine with which it should be possible to play all kinds of rhythm, all kinds of melody, all kinds of sound. This is very nicely explained, nicely but difficult to understand, but we made, with the help, of course, of experts, translations into German, so my students were able to read it, and I put a group of 3 wonderful guys together, a Chinese mechatronic and a wonderful Russian programmer, a woman from Moscow, and a graphic designer, and they constructed the machine. Of course, we used also some literature which was existing on this manual. Most prominent, perhaps, a book from 1930 by George Farmer, an English scholar. He still comes from that time, which we cannot imagine anymore. When I studied at the Technical University in the late 1960s, beginning of the 1970s, we still had these wonderful books, and of course the books are still existing, where you had on one hand, on one side, the Arabic text, and on the other side, the German or the English text, or Persian texts. The technical institutes, the technical universities, still afforded till, let's say, fascism destroyed this whole culture, afforded large institutes with philologists who were experts for foreign languages, because they knew this is our cultural heritage. All the translations which had been done by Arabian scholars in Basra, in Baghdad, and so on, have created the base for our culture. If they would not have translated this stuff and reinterpreted this material, most of the things in what we call European modernity would simply not exist. With the help of George Farmer, this is a very simple sketch. We came closer and closer to our own construction. This is how it looked like after the students did their work. On the left side you have the recording device, on the right side you have the player. The example which we took is the one which Banu Musa also used in their manual. It's a zornai, a flute which is familiar to you, and as you can see here on the top, when you play the flute you are connected with rings and strings to this recording device. The information of the different movements is written on this rotating disc, and of course when you are then playing this information, which you can see here on the rotating disc, you can play the flute again. I show you a quick clip. This was the first test which the students did, and of course they were extremely happy. The sound is horrible, but they were extremely happy that it worked. And then, of course, sounds pretty good. I also call this kind of tactics micro-archaeological reconstruction. This is a little bit a long name, but it means the same as this prospective archaeology. One of the most, also for myself, moving prospective archaeology projects in this context was the revitalization of a very famous time measuring and time reading device from a book which was written by Al-Jazari. It's very complicated even to locate him correctly. He comes from this area, which is the Kurdish part of Turkey at the moment. I gave once a lecture in Istanbul on him some years ago. and I named him a Kurd. And after the lecture, there was no reaction in the room, and I did not know why. This was a while. It was perhaps 5 years ago. It was a while before Erdogan got crazy, and I asked my host then afterwards, and he said, "Yeah, you said he's a Kurd. And nobody wants to talk about a Kurd." So it was. He's one of the most genius engineers in the Islamic tradition, of course, the people, the engineers and the scientists in Turkey, they admire him a lot. And finally, we went to Anatolia, to Bursa, which is impossible nowadays to do that in this form, at least. And we asked a group of people from the Museum for Technology and Science to help us to reconstruct the machine, and they immediately said, "Of course, science is for everybody, we do that for you." This is the frontispiece of the book, which is called, in English translation, Book of Theory and Praxis of Mechanical Arts. It contains a lot of beautiful automatons. The center automaton, which is most famous because meanwhile it's also standing in a shopping mall in Dubai. You can see that here on the right picture, and it's built quite a few times. For many reasons, extremely interesting. Al-Jazari, like most of the Arabian scholars of that time, of the First Renaissance, were absolutely clear that the knowledge they used to build these kind of devices was not only developed by the Arab culture. It came from different sources. It came from ancient Greek culture. It came from Persian culture, the Iran. It came from Egypt and from different other places in the world. And this machine, this automaton, which helps you to read time and to experience time like a sensation, like Roland Barthes would have put it, is a wonderful dedication, an homage to world culture knowledge of the time. Of 1206. This was the time when Al-Jazari wrote that book. I analyzed very carefully the machine, and you can do it in a rough way like that. On the top you have a phoenix. A phoenix is a very important symbolic bird in Egypt culture, a reference to Egypt. On the front of the machine you have of course, two falcons sitting there. This is a clear reference to the Arabian culture. But very important, in the center, you have two Chinese dragons. They are obviously in the shape of Chinese dragons. So it should be clear that the reference to China is done here. At the same time, Shenkuo in China built similar machines, but perhaps there were not direct connections with them. Of course, Alexandria was a very important reference, the hydraulic mechanism on the top of the machine. Mesopotamia, the area between the Euphrates and the Tigris, extremely important with the references inside of the machine. Here you have an Indian elephant, very clearly to be defined as an Indian elephant, but the carpet is from Persia. And Al-Jazari took not only took notice of that, but he made very clear in his description that this carpet should be a Persian carpet. This is his dedication to the Persian tradition of automaton building, and so on and so on. So in a whole you have a reference system, a network, so to speak, of different cultures, of different knowledge traditions, which are inside of this object. This is more for amusement. My visit in Bursa in July 2015. On my way back through Istanbul, the first of these bomb attacks started. It was just one day after I've left Istanbul, and we still were able to finish the project, but it became more difficult and more difficult. The guys who built that, the engineers, were absolutely fantastic. The whole workshop they had, which was like an airport with pieces of aeroplanes, everything you can build something out of mechanically, was absolutely beautiful. This is the electronic heart of the device, of the telephone clock, which usually is disguised, of course, also in the version we finally were able to show in Karlsruhe in October 2015. Here inside of the stomach of the elephant you have the electronics which is driving the machine. If you want to know how it works very quickly, on the top the movement is started hydraulic pneumatically with the rotation of the bird. Then a ball is spit out of the mouth of the falcons into the mouth of the dragon. The dragon is turning around, moves this little figure here, which is writing the time on the disc, and is moving this man with the drums, who rhythmically is counting time and presenting it acoustically. Presenting it acoustically, at least with one sketch, I would like to. Oh, it's 10 already. I would like to address something which interests me a lot. Recently, there is already some kind of a term of it, but I'm not very happy with it. I did not coin this term, archaeoacoustics. I'm not very happy with it. But what we are doing again and again in projects is to try to reconstruct acoustically spaces and time-space connections. And we did that here with this atlas of media thinking and acting in Berlin. Mrs. Preuße, you will be happy, at least Stefano, I think Robert was not part of that, but Stefanie Rau was definitely part of this project too. And it was also some kind of a base for the LUL project. Here you see a map of Berlin, and all these little dots are places of events, of bookshops, of bars, of pubs, of places where media thinking and acting took place between 1948, 1950, and I think we stopped around 2000, 2005 or something like that, because it really got too much. You have different thematic fields here, which in the electronic version, of course, can be then shown autonomously, and you have a lot of connections between the places. Here you have a long list with all the places, and with the help of a musician from Einstürzende Neubauten, we got the reconstruction of the sound of the city. Just listen for 2 minutes. Very long, it's 45 minutes long, because it was made for space. Inside of this space there was not only this electronic map, but a lot of interviews with Einstürzende Neubauten, Boris Greuß talking with Heiner Müller, and all kinds of very interesting things taking place in the space, and this was the soundtrack for the connecting all the different pieces. I would like to conclude with a last example. I will go deeper into that not tomorrow, but the day after tomorrow, I think. But have some patience with that when I'm introducing to this project 100 masterpieces. The conclusion is a prospective archaeology project which we did on Walter Benjamin some years ago. By coincidence, I found a stack of cards in the library, the university library of Gießen, a very small town. I have a very special connection with that, and this is why somehow I fell over it. Before Benjamin was leaving and was running away from Germany, he made a little project on Lichtenberg. Lichtenberg was a philosopher and a writer who also wrote a lot on natural sciences and also on electricity, and an extremely interesting thinker. I don't know how much of his stuff is translated into English. Benjamin did that simply to earn money. He did a lot of this kind of projects. He needed this project, otherwise he couldn't survive because he didn't earn much with his writings. So he did this kind of little project, and then it was very interesting. But working on this bibliography of Lichtenberg, he started to develop a radio play. And this radio play was called later Lichtenberg, not more, and it was never realized. And this is where the idea of prospective archaeology comes into the game. We sat together with some people from radio and with some students from Karlsruhe, and we simply did the piece, and it was part of the exhibition. The students did a wonderful work because they went beyond the text of this extraordinary play, which is very short. It plays on the moon, and Benjamin had a wonderful idea. He invented for the people on the moon 3 machines with which they are able to connect with the people on the earth in a specific way. The first machine was called spectrophone, which enabled them to see everything which was going on the earth. The second machine was extremely interesting. It was called parlamonium. This was a machine with which the inhabitants of the moon could transform the speech, also my silly speech, into spherical music, the speech of the earthlings into spherical music. If the speech went on their nerves, so to speak, and they were annoyed with it, they could switch to spherical music. The third machine was an orainoscope, with which the inhabitants of the moon were able to read the dreams of the inhabitants of the earth. And the students who built the radio play with the help of this professional people from radio focused on these 3 machines and made a wonderful installation. I just play you a very, very short piece because it's in German, but you get at least an idea of it.
Das Gefühl zu fallen. In die Leere zwischen den Wörtern. Die Pause.
Feeling to fall into the void between the words.
Man möchte lieber lesen, was weggestrichen hat, als was hat stehen lassen.
We want more to read what he left out.
Die Laufbahn einer Rakete von der Erde zum Mond, Ebbe und Flut, nur ohne Wasser. Nur die Bewegung.
This is space, of course.
Mehr Bindung als Masse. Mehr Idee als Materie. Supersymmetrie. unendlich mal schneller als das Licht. Informationsgehalt gleich 0.
Okay. Let's stop here. Prospective archaeology, perhaps in the case of Ramon Lull, it became most clear, I hope you got the idea, means not only that you are going through technology of the past presences, try to understand it, but also through reconstruction, bringing it into the present and into a possible future. These thinking machines, which Ramon Lull developed 700 years ago, of course, are wonderful tools for a possible future, which we have not yet as a reality, and we can think about at least. And this is the sense of it. So I'm for me, this notion is extremely important. This is not nostalgic stuff. This is absolutely in the present and in the future. When the kids, if I may say so, were reconstructing this Banu Musa automaton, they were learning so much about what an algorithmical artifact is, how you can build an algorithmical artifact with the most simple things. And this is what I'm trying to activate through this kind of work, and to give it a kind of a bright future. I also installed, Chris was so nice to mention my attempts to change institutions into something different. I also made some attempts to install this kind of work as a, let's say, institutional work. In Karlsruhe, I invented a program which is called Archivists in Residence. Archivists in Residence, not artists in residence, but archivists in residence, are dealing exactly with such kind of things. Of course, mainly they are dealing with reactivating old computer hard disks and all kinds of things which are not readable anymore. This is also, by the way, this was the project where it all started. For Without Firm Ground, the Wilhelm Flusser and the Arts, we reconstructed Flusser's hypertext, which was perhaps the first hypertext which has been written by a philosopher, at least, in 1989. Flusser used the Institute for Nuclear Research in Karlsruhe. He was very brutal in that. I show it to you. This was the reconstruction situation, and this is the hypertext by itself. It's a stack card system, which was programmed into an early Apple machine, and we had some problems with playing it. We bought some machines from the United States from this period of time, but it did not work because there was a corruption in the sound at one point, and this always led to the whole collapsing of the system, and so we had to make a re-enactment of the piece, and this is somehow as it started. This is a reconstruction we made from the script, a book which Flusser wrote in 1987. It was one of the very early e-books, so to speak. I'm very careful with the term first. I never, as an archaeologist, I never say first, because you always find something which is before that. So a very early version of an electronic book, including some possibilities to move inside of the text, to jump between different chapters through concepts and so on and so on. This was also not working anymore properly, and as you can see here, we made it rerun on the old machines. This is a wonderful field of work, as I said already, full of pleasure, intellectual and sensual pleasure, but it's also a very important possibility for the future for young people who are talented and who dance on different weddings, informatics, engineering, machine, philosophy, history, to bring all that together and to construct something for the future. I'm absolutely convinced that for the next decades, this kind of archivists will be very, very much in demand. Thank you very much for your patience.